The initial step I will prioritize is one of the strongest and of course the most frequently used, or unfortunately, the most frequently abused preparations that require my attention and careful handling. And such a prep, which explicitly has many side effects and can cause the most damage, is Trenbolone, a substance known for its numerous adverse reactions and potential for causing significant harm. When it comes to the adverse effects of anabolic steroids, I have personally encountered the highest number of these side effects with Trenbolone. It is advantageous to state how to achieve the desired effect while minimizing the side effects, because once you take it, you need to be aware of the potential risks and take necessary precautions to mitigate any harm and ensure your well-being. So I won't forbid you, actually no one will forbid you, even though it's illegal. Simply if you decide to take it, you will simply get it and you will take it, so at least you would know, oh my God, how to handle it. So I utilized all the esters in that Trenbolone, which means I used Trenbolone acetate, which is a faster ester, which actually has a short half-life, which means that during, let's say, a 24-hour period, it would be metabolized and eliminated from the body more quickly. On the second, third, and fourth days, the sensation was minimal, so I needed to regularly apply it to ensure its effectiveness. I discovered it was most effective when I administered 50 milligrams of Trenbolone acetate on a daily basis. The problem with it is that it is very, very toxic to the kidneys because, as you know, Trenbolone acetate is always colored red because it contains a dye that is very toxic to the kidneys. So there has always been an issue with the fact that explicitly quite a considerable number of individuals who may have kidneys that are weaker started experiencing problems with their kidneys at a very early stage of their lives. At that acetate, it applies twice because frequent application is necessary there. That means daily, at most every other day. So of course you get more of that dye. Therefore that acetate is much more harmful to the kidneys than the slower esters. I utilized Trenbolone acetate for the longest time. The longest duration I have ever used it in my life was for 5 weeks, and that was the maximum limit. Then I felt that my kidneys were just taking a beating. I even know people who, after long-term use of Trenbolone acetate, were peeing blood and had severely damaged kidneys. The issue with kidneys is that, unlike the liver, they don't easily come together, and once damaged, it's hard to restore them to their original state, so be cautious. Trenbolone and citrate pose a significant risk to the kidneys, and prolonged use for more than 3 weeks can have fatal consequences. Therefore, it is crucial to exercise extreme caution when using these substances. In terms of Trenbolone and the quote, what was documented as positive effects is a brutal and significant increase in muscle mass, which can be considered as a remarkable outcome. That means that when you're stuck on some things, when you take Trenbolone acetate, you actually gain an additional 3 to 5 kilos. So it leads to a brutal increase in muscle mass. Another factor to consider is that Trenbolone acetate has the most significant impact out of all the preparations on fat burning. So I always observed impeccable sharpness, indicating that throughout those 3 weeks, I genuinely believed, perhaps on one occasion out of every 50, which held great importance. So I consistently prioritized it towards the conclusion, preceding the races, in the final 3 weeks. On which there was a quote, I always planted, it is enough to always have 3-4 days before the competition date for the water to go down. When planted late, it retains water, can't be pulled out, nor causes craziness. Use a day or two before the race, already nonsensical. Regarding Trenbolone acetate, it possesses an additional significant benefit, namely the fact that you effectively utilize nearly all of the substances you ingest. This implies that the food you consume while using it will be utilized to a great extent, which precisely leads to the brutal surge in mass and strength, resulting in a significant increase. Basically, the good thing about Trenbolone is to increase protein. What I have found to be effective is to increase protein intake to 300 grams per day and reduce sugars to 100. As you train, the more free sugar you consume, the lower the quality of your muscles tends to be affected. I tried it several times when I increased carbohydrates, so those muscles were building up faster. But it was just water. When I increased only protein, it went slowly. But still, during those 3-4 weeks, it just kept thickening, and the muscles hardened beautifully, and it wasn't watery. I even held less water in the subcutaneous tissue. So I definitely recommend reducing sugars and increasing protein with those Trenbolones. The reality is that even those 300 grams of protein, which is a deadly amount for a typical non-dumper, so for an individual on Trenbolone, or for myself, it posed no difficulty. I had an incredible time. I didn't even encounter any digestive problems. My body swiftly adjusted to it and promptly utilized the entire 300 grams of food that was available. Further influence of Trenbolone and acetate. Positive for me, negative for many people. Trenbolone and acetate as such, or Trenbolone in general, has a brutal impact on the psyche. The first one boosts self-confidence, the second one, but extremely boosts aggression. And last but not least, it has an impact on the development of depression, depressive states, anxiety, and so on, especially in those weaker individuals. So, who has a particularly weak psyche or has some problems in their personal or professional life, or simply, if they are not doing well, they may have a tendency towards depression, let's say tendencies towards anxiety, or they may be taking antidepressants. Simply, you people, never use Trenbolone while on antidepressants. It's the biggest contraindication you've ever encountered. You will get to a point where if you don't kill yourself, you idiot, then come to me for 100,000, just really give it to you, because it's really like psycho. Simply, once you take antidepressants and combine them with Trenbolone, it is simply a deadly combination, and you will definitely burn the stick when you have the deed. Be cautious. Trenbolone and antidepressants don't mix. Never try using it. Regarding the psyche, it just uplifts someone's mental state in this place. They experience positive emotions, feel recharged, are able to manage more tasks, are cheerful, simply doing well. Someone, however, becomes depressed and starts experiencing mental issues. Therefore, exercise caution. It is a difficult task to accurately predict how it will function for that specific individual in question. Personally, I was lucky that, on the contrary, when I had tremors, I felt absolutely great mentally. I was able to do more work, I was able to train better, harder, etc. Of course, I say, everyone has their own experience, and I've met people who used Trenbolone and went crazy. So be careful with that. Another thing regarding Trenbolone is that it is one of the most, or specifically I have noticed it on myself with Trenbolone, the greatest influence on the increase in strength. Just as soon as Trenbolone arrived, I immediately noticed a brutal increase in strength, maybe even up to 15-20%, which is terribly much, and it really showed a lot. Also, as I always said in the videos, I always had the heaviest weights because I used the most of Trenbolone acetate right before the race. Another steroid I used was Trenbolone enanthate. The dosage was much lower, requiring administration twice a week, which proved to be sufficient. A total of 100 milligrams per week, divided into 2 doses of 50 milligrams each, worked perfectly for me. I found Trenbolone enanthate to be an effective and well-tolerated option for my needs. Even with my weight being around 100 kilograms, a dosage of 100 milligrams administered twice a week was more than sufficient for me, considering my body mass. Naturally, when multiplied, it can have a more favorable impact, but simultaneously, it is similar to all preparations. A higher dosage can actually indicate a greater number of negative effects and potential drawbacks. You will definitely experience a greater negative effect on the kidneys with a higher dose of Trenbolone, because it's more of a mess, therefore more dye, therefore greater kidney damage. Using more Trenbolone leads to greater kidney damage. Many Czech athletes suffered kidney damage from Trenbolone, specifically almost kidney failure and similar issues. So be cautious. Even from what I've heard, there was this one incredibly skilled racer who was a professional in the 90s. I won't mention their name because it's not relevant, but they owe their success to Trenbolone and performance-enhancing drugs. He had pain and his kidneys failed. But definitely, he had to stop racing. Today, from 130 kilo, my brother is simply an 80 kilo guy. And if he had hair, since he doesn't have it anymore due to Trenbolone, he would tear it out of frustration because he really overdid it with Trenbolone and his kidneys simply failed. Yes, There are indeed recorded cases of kidney failure that can be attributed to the use of Trenbolone. So it will be important to maintain low dosing during the training, because even with, and I say this from my own experience, even with low doses, you will get very, very good positive effects of that training, because it means a big increase in gains, a big increase in strength, desire for training, overall improved psyche, etc. And it is precisely at those high doses that you can actually only observe the negatives, which indicates acne, excessive aggression, explosiveness, depressive states, anxiety, and of course, last but not least, kidney damage are all potential side effects of this medication. Yes, because once you initiate the act of urinating blood, there is no way to return to the previous state. Another one of those preparations or derivatives that I have tried regarding Trenbolone is Trenbolone Hexa. Hexa, something, 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 it's another name, it starts with Hexa. I don't remember exactly what it's called until today. The compound was given the name Parabolan, which was its foreign designation. I believe that all of you are already acquainted with this compound. It is important to note that Parabolan is actually a form of Trenbolone in Hexa, characterized by a slower or medium-length ester. I have documented the most remarkable results from all Trenbolones. In my view, this Trenbolone, this Parabolan, is the absolute best Trenbolone ever produced. It can be used for both cutting and bulking. Unfortunately, it does retain more water than acetate, but for me it is the best Trenbolone ever invented by man. I used to call it Finaplix in the 90s. It was an absolute miracle. Professionals were already working on it in an incredible way. Me too. But again, an important aspect is that one unidentified company, which was among the first to introduce the genuine Parabolan to Europe, manufactured ampules containing 75 milligrams of the substance. These ampules proved to be more than sufficient for a duration of 2 weeks. This means that 150, I emphasize again, 150 milligram T-hexy for a week was more than enough. The result was terrible. I gained a terrifying amount of muscles. The strength was absolutely outrageous. Things were happening there that you wouldn't even imagine. So really 150 milligrams of hexy is more than enough. The problem is that this Parabolan or Finaplix or Hexa is very, very toxic. It is extremely toxic to the kidneys. Yes, the truth is that I was fortunate to be born with exceptionally strong kidneys, and I even possess a larger volume of renal capacity. Individual kidneys about 30% less than a normal person, so kidney damage would be a big coincidence for me. I simply have very, very efficient kidneys, which unfortunately could be seen in races when I started to pull water, and usually pulling water was never a problem for me. I always ended up wanting more water than I had to. So for example, during a compensatory period, I lost about 9 kilos completely fucked up. My kidneys simply gave everything they could. Yeah. So it's not a complete advantage, but it has an advantage in that you can fight with Trenbolone there for years, and the kidneys are absolutely healthy. However, exercise caution. Why? Due to my consistent use of an exceedingly minimal dosage at all times. Such doses around 600 milligrams and more per week are absolute science fiction for me. I would really be afraid of it, because in order to gain a few kilograms of muscles and get in shape, which I can also do with other things, it is harder, but you can do it too. He took a risk with his kidneys, which are considered to be the most vital organ in the human body, excluding the bladder. So supposedly, I would not do it, even though I am a big fool, despite being fully aware of the potential negative outcomes and the risks involved. So today, after 13 years of racing, I can say that my kidneys are completely healthy, and I have never had any problems with them. Yeah, I had kidney inflammation after the first races due to being catheterized for a doping control. But that is a different story. Another video once again. I will sometimes share tales from races. I believe you will be very surprised by what I was able to go through for the sake of success in bodybuilding. You won't believe it. And once I catheterized myself, for those who are unaware of what catheterization is, you insert a tube into your penis and expel your own urine while retaining someone else's urine in order to undergo a doping control. But that's another story. So such things were absolutely common in bodybuilding, and they still are today, although nowadays it's every idiot who gets caught up in competitions. Today, People are afraid of everything, and we have made brutal interventions into their health. As expected, I ultimately developed a kidney inflammation of an almost brutal nature as a consequence of that encounter with the great outdoors. But as I mentioned, that was the only problem throughout these years. No incidents happened to me in life from Trenbolone, because I reiterate, I always used very, very low doses. I will reiterate once more, and regarding the use of Trenbolone, by the way, I have utilized Trenbolone on its own as well, because it is very strong, both as an androgen and anabolic agent. Basically, it effectively fulfills the purpose of helping me gain muscles, while at the same time, I experienced the androgenic effects that were associated with it. That means I experienced a heightened level of aggression, an intensified level of potency, and so on and so forth. Attention, what is interesting, what is such a knowledge of mine, Trenbolone cannot be used for too long. I have conducted thorough and reliable tests, which have consistently shown that when Trenbolone is used for a duration exceeding 5 weeks, it leads to a significant decrease in libido. After those 5 weeks, suddenly it starts to break and you lose interest in sex. Of course, in weaker individuals, erectile dysfunction and similar disorders will naturally occur. Therefore, I do not recommend the long-term use of tremolos to anyone, precisely because it clearly harms sexual activity. Merely libido simply plummets completely to hell. Consequently, this is one of the most detrimental side effects that I have witnessed throughout the years of my observation. I have never surpassed or gone beyond the duration of those 5 weeks. This is because it is not a very intelligent decision. That means that after, let's say, a week or two, when you work 7, 8, 90 weeks, then you don't have the urge for a drink anymore after those 5 weeks. It's fine, you just bite it. However, I always had a fear that it could potentially have some long-term duration, and personally, I truly couldn't handle it. So I was always afraid of this. I always had respect for it, from which it was merely for this particular reason. Due to this reason, and consequently, the length of the bark of that particular Trenbolone never exceeded me in any way, shape or form whatsoever. What works well, for example, is to use the slow Trenbolones, the enanthate, the hexa, and then, when the competitions are approaching, switch to the acetate for 3 weeks, which also proved to be effective. Yeah, it's actually a different ester. It works a little differently, so even the side effects are not so obvious. In fact, the bark of that Trenbolone will increase from those 5 to at least 8 to 10 weeks, which is enough. And the burden for these two is already like a market, but I have to responsibly say that I just did it too, and it worked. But be careful how I say it. If I say who is a little weaker individual, it won't work. As for that Trenbolone, first of all, a person needs to follow some rules, you know. That signifies a small dosage, in summary, to give a brief overview of the prescribed amount of medication. Administer a low dosage. Secondly, make sure to use as much fluid as possible when taking it, and drink as much as possible to flush out the red dye from your system. Elevate the daily intake of protein to a range of 250 to 300 milligrams in order to meet the desired dietary requirements. Reduce sugars, which is crucial for the quality, for the hardness of those muscles. Finally, ensure to keep a close eye on any potential side effects, particularly when it comes to the well-being of your mental health. Another note, not mine, but something I heard, and it caught my attention from someone else. I strongly identify with it as if Trenbolone has the most significant influence on the production of IGF-1 growth factor out of all the preparations available in the market. This is in fact a substance that the body generates. It is a growth factor that resembles insulin in its effects. It is in reality a substance that the body produces and that leads to the multiplication of muscle cells in the body. Supposedly, even with Trenbolone, there can be an increase in muscle deposition in cell gain. This implies not just expanding muscle cells, but also increasing the number of muscle cells. This signifies that it possesses a similar impact to, for example, the growth hormone, or IGF-1 alone for that matter. So it is about the fact that the IGF-1 level is specifically increasing in that particular location, and that has an impact on the formation of new muscles in that area. But I say, that is not my personal experience, I just got into it. But the fact that I identify with it, because after taking Trenbolone, when I gained muscles, even after discontinuation, I still had them. Therefore, due to the influence of this diet, when you increase protein intake and decrease sugar intake, your muscles will naturally become denser and will be better maintained after discontinuation. So that's one influence, but in my opinion, this also has an influence on it, that it actually raises your IGF-1 and multiplies muscle sense for you. Thus, you effortlessly and effectively acquire the lean muscles you desire for a fit and toned physique. So that's all about Trenbolone. And in other aspects, with respect to this video, it is expected to have a total of around 6 to 8 episodes. In each part, we will discuss each additional preparation separately, or rather my experiences with each additional preparation separately, so you have something to look forward to. And people, be careful with the tremolo. It's not a butt to use, but if you follow certain rules, you will have a lot of fun with it. Hi.